We paid for first class, not a nursery. Hiroshi scoffed, his words igniting a wave of disdainful murmurs about Aisha and her young daughter. Aisha only smiled softly, cradling her child close without a word. But moments later, the pilot's voice boomed over the intercom. Attention passengers, we urgently require the expertise of global aviation security consultant, Ms. Aisha Thompson. The cabin fell silent as Hiroshi sank back into his seat, his face paling. Aisha sat there, her daughter's head resting against her chest, her tiny hand clutching a frayed stuffed rabbit. She didn't look up. She didn't waver. Her fingers gently smoothed her daughter's braids. For a moment it was just the two of them in that crowded cabin, surrounded by the hum of the engines and the weight of countless judgmental stares. The first-class lounge was all sleek mahogany and polished steel, but it felt colder than the air at 30,000 feet. Aisha's simple navy cardigan and worn jeans stood out against the tailored kimonos and designer suits. Her hair was tied back in a neat bun, no makeup, no jewelry except a thin gold band on her left hand. She didn't belong here, at least, that's what everyone seemed to think. The moment hung heavy, like a storm brewing. Aisha's silence wasn't weakness. It was something else, something deeper. She rocked her daughter gently, her soft breathing barely audible over the plane's drone. The pilot's announcement lingered, but no one dared speak. Not yet. They were all watching, waiting, trying to figure out how this woman, this nobody with a child and a scuffed carry-on, could be the one the pilot needed. Hiroshi leaned forward, his platinum cufflinks glinting under the cabin lights. He was the kind of man who expected the world to bend to his presence, CEO of Nakamura Global Ventures, a titan in Tokyo's finance world, always in a suit that cost more than most people's mortgages. He nudged the man next to him, a venture capitalist with slick back hair and a grin to match. Must be a mistake, Hiroshi said, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. Her. A security consultant? What's she going to do, mop the cockpit floor? The venture capitalist chuckled, and a few others joined in, their laughter sharp like shattered crystal. Yuki, Hiroshi's assistant, sat across the aisle, her manicured nails tapping her tablet. She was young, ruthless, the kind who'd climb over anyone to get ahead. I bet she used a charity voucher, Yuki said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. Look at her. How else could she afford first class? She tossed her hair, glancing around to ensure her audience was listening. A woman in a silk shawl nearby nodded, whispering to her companion, she looks more like a cleaner than a first-class passenger. Did you see that bag? Probably from a second-hand shop. A man in a charcoal suit, his cufflinks gleaming like miniature medals, leaned toward his seatmate, a woman with a jade necklace that screamed old wealth. It's people like her who ruin the experience, he said, his voice low but pointed. Bringing a kid into first class. It's like she's mocking us, the woman nodded, her lips tight. Honestly, they should vet passengers better. This isn't a budget flight. Aisha's daughter stirred, her stuffed rabbit slipping slightly, and Aisha adjusted it without looking up. The man's eyes lingered on her, his sneer deepening. Look at that bag. Bet she's got food stamps in there. His seatmate laughed, a sharp, practiced sound that cut through the cabin. Aisha didn't react. She kept her eyes on her daughter, adjusting the blanket over her small legs. Her hands moved slow and steady, like she was grounding herself in her child. The whispers grew bolder, feeding off each other. A man in a tailored navy suit leaned back, his voice carrying. People like her don't belong here. This is first class, not a welfare flight. Another passenger, a woman with emerald earrings that caught the light, added, it's embarrassing, dragging a kid like that into our space. The cabin felt like a pack of hyenas circling, each testing how far they could go. Then Aisha looked up, not at Hiroshi, not at Yuki, but at the woman with the earrings. Her eyes were calm, steady, like a calm sea before a tempest. Is it? She asked, her voice soft but clear. The woman froze, her mouth half open, caught off guard. The cabin went quiet for a moment before Hiroshi cleared his throat and laughed it off. "Oh, she speaks," he said, raising his glass of sake. "Don't get comfortable, sweetheart. You're out of your depth." A flight attendant, not Amara but a younger one with shaky hands, passed by, her tray wobbling as she served drinks. She glanced at Aisha, then quickly looked away, like she'd been caught staring at something forbidden. The woman with the jade necklace noticed and leaned toward the man in the suit. "Even the staff knows she's out of place," she whispered, loud enough for Aisha to hear. "I bet they're embarrassed to serve her." The man nodded, his cufflinks flashing as he adjusted his tie. "Probably boarded the wrong plane. Someone should tell her." Aisha's fingers paused on her daughter's blanket for a moment before she smoothed it out, her face unchanged. She didn't respond. She tucked the blanket tighter around her daughter and turned her gaze to the window, where the clouds stretched endless and gray. But there was something in the way her shoulders squared just a fraction, her fingers lingering on the blanket, that said she wasn't shaken. Not yet. The plane hummed along, and the passengers settled back, thinking they'd won. They hadn't. A memory hung in the air, unspoken but heavy. Aisha's hand brushed against a small photo tucked in her bag, one she hadn't looked at in months. It was her younger self, standing next to a man in a pilot's uniform, both smiling under a bright summer sky. Her daughter wasn't born yet, but you could see the promise of her in the way Aisha leaned into the man, her hand on his arm. The photo was worn, creased from being carried too long. She didn't pull it out now, but her fingers lingered, like she could feel that moment through the leather of her bag. The flight attendant, Amara, walked down the aisle, her steps quick and purposeful. She stopped at Aisha's seat, her voice low but firm. "Ms. Thompson, the pilot needs to speak with you," Hiroshi snorted, leaning back. "What, does the pilot need her to clean the controls?" The venture capitalist laughed, and Yuki chimed in. "Maybe they're short on tea back there." Amara didn't smile. She waited, her eyes fixed on Aisha, who stood smoothly, handing her sleeping daughter to the attendant with a quiet, "Thank you." She walked toward the cockpit, her steps even, her old carry-on left behind like it didn't matter. As Aisha disappeared behind the curtain, a woman in a tailored green dress, her lipstick flawless, turned to the man next to her. "I bet she's just a glorified assistant," she said, her voice sharp with certainty. "They call anyone a consultant these days." The man, a tech mogul with a smartwatch that kept buzzing, nodded. "Yeah, probably some token hire. You know how it is. Check a box, give her a title." He tapped his watch, smirking. "She's not fooling anyone with that kid and those clothes." The cabin buzzed with agreement, the passengers feeding off each other's scorn, their voices growing louder as if Aisha's absence gave them permission. The passengers whispered as she passed. "Why her?" one said, a man in a silk vest who looked like he spent his weekends on a private jet. "What's so special about her?" another muttered, a woman with a designer tote clutched tight in her lap. The cabin hummed with questions, but Aisha didn't turn back. She moved like someone who knew exactly where she was going, even if no one else did. Amara followed, carrying the girl, who stirred but didn't wake, her stuffed rabbit dangling from one arm. A man with a sleek laptop case, his posture rigid with self-importance, leaned toward his companion, a woman with a sapphire brooch. "She's probably just fetching coffee for the real consultant," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Look at her. More nanny than expert." The woman nodded, her brooch glinting as she adjusted her scarf. "Exactly. They let anyone in these days. It's a disgrace." Aisha's daughter shifted in Amara's arms, her small hand clutching the rabbit tighter, and Amara's eyes flicked toward the passengers, a silent warning they didn't catch. In the cockpit, the pilot's face was serious but kind. He handed Aisha a headset, and she slipped it on without a word. The co-pilot glanced over, his eyes widening slightly before he caught himself. "Ms. Thompson," the pilot said, "we've got a situation. Unidentified aircraft on our radar. We need your expertise." Aisha nodded, her fingers already moving over the satellite comms, her voice low and steady as she spoke in codes and protocols the passengers would never understand. Back in the cabin, the whispers grew louder but less certain, less cruel. Something was shifting. When Aisha returned, the cabin watched her every move. She settled her daughter back in her lap, the girl's small hand reaching for her sleeve. A man in a linen blazer, his sunglasses perched on his head like he was still at a beach club, leaned across the aisle. "So, what was that about?" he asked, his tone half curious, half mocking. "You some kind of VIP or just good at answering phones?" The passengers around him tittered, waiting for her to falter. Aisha looked at him, her eyes steady, and said, "You'll find out soon enough." Her voice was quiet but carried a weight that made the man lean back, his sunglasses slipping slightly. Hiroshi wasn't ready to let it go. He leaned forward, his voice carrying over the plane's hum. "Honorary title, I bet," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "They hand those out like candy these days." "Doesn't mean she's anybody," Yuki nodded, her smile brittle. "Exactly. If she was really important, she wouldn't be stuck babysitting in first class." The woman with the emerald earrings chimed in, her voice softer now, like she was trying to convince herself. "Maybe she just signed some minor deal. You know how they inflate titles." The cabin laughed, but it was thinner, less sure. Aisha's eyes flicked up for a moment, landing on Hiroshi. They were cold, sharp, like she could see straight through him. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than anything they could throw at her. The cabin felt smaller now, like the walls were closing in on those who'd spoken too soon. Amara walked by again, her tray empty, and gave Aisha a nod, longer, more deliberate this time. It was a signal, and the passengers saw it. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, just enough to make the sake glasses clink and the overhead bins rattle. A few passengers gasped, but Aisha didn't flinch. Her daughter stirred, murmuring in her sleep, and Aisha whispered back, her voice too soft to hear. Amara passed again, this time with a tray of meals. When she reached Aisha's row, she paused, setting down a glass of water with a small, respectful nod. It was subtle but landed like a stone in the cabin. Hiroshi noticed, his jaw tightening, but he said nothing. Not yet. Dinner service began, the cabin filling with the clink of cutlery and the smell of overcooked salmon. Aisha's daughter woke, rubbing her eyes, and reached for her water. Her little hand knocked the glass, spilling it across the tray table, soaking the edge of Aisha's cardigan. Hiroshi pounced. "Can't even teach her kid manners," he said, his voice loud and smug. "Disrupting the whole cabin like that," Yuki laughed, her eyes glinting. "A shabby little mother. What an embarrassment to sit with us." The venture capitalist shook his head, muttering, "Probably abandoned by her husband. That's why she's so miserable." A woman in a silk coat, her perfume heavy, leaned toward her companion, a man with a gold watch that caught the light. "It's sad," she said, her voice laced with false pity. "She's probably scraping by, thinking this flight is her big break." The man nodded, his eyes flicking to Aisha's worn sneakers. "Yeah, bet she's here on someone else's dime. Charity case, probably." Aisha's daughter looked up, her eyes wide, and Aisha pulled her closer, her hand steady on her chest. "It's okay, sweetie," she murmured, her voice soft but firm. The cabin watched, their eyes darting between her and each other, the air thick with unspoken questions. A man in a tailored gray suit, his cufflinks engraved with his initials, leaned toward the woman next to him, her silver earrings swaying as she nodded. "She's probably just a single mom who got lucky," he said, his voice low but sharp. "No way she's got real power. Look at that kid, she's her whole world, not some fancy title." The woman smirked, adjusting her earrings. "Right. She's clinging to that girl like she's her only achievement." Aisha's fingers tightened slightly on her daughter's blanket, her eyes fixed on her as she played, oblivious to the venom in the air. The plane cruised on, the hum of the engine steady. Aisha's daughter was awake now, playing quietly with her stuffed rabbit, her small fingers tracing its worn patches. Aisha watched her, her face softening for the first time. But there was a weight in her eyes, something heavier than before. She reached into her bag, her fingers brushing that old photo again. This time, she pulled it out for a second, glancing at the man in the pilot's uniform. Her daughter looked up, pointing at the rabbit. "Daddy gave me this," she said, her voice small but clear. Aisha nodded, tucking the photo away. "I know, sweetie," she whispered. A man in a tailored blazer, his smug grin hinting at his latest stock market win, leaned toward Yuki. "Bet she's just here for the free drinks," he said, loud enough for Aisha to hear. "Look at her, probably never flown anything but economy," Yuki smirked, scrolling through her tablet. "She's out of her depth, trying to play with the big leagues," the man chuckled, adjusting his blazer. "Should have stayed in coach with that kid." Aisha's hand stilled on her bag, her jaw tightening just a fraction, but she said nothing, her focus back on her daughter's quiet game. Hiroshi wasn't done. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with false charm. "Hey, I always respected you," he said, loud enough for the cabin to hear. "Just a little fun earlier, right?" Yuki forced a laugh, her eyes darting around. "Yeah, we were just joking." "No harm done," the woman with the tote nodded quickly. "We're lucky she was here," but their words felt hollow, like they were trying to backtrack. Hiroshi slid his business card across the aisle, his smile tight. "We should collaborate. I can offer you opportunities." Aisha looked at the card, then back at Hiroshi. "You're mistaken," she said, her voice soft but final. "I don't need opportunities from you." She pushed the card back, her fingers steady. Hiroshi's smile faltered, and he sat back, his hands clenching the armrests. The cabin watched, waiting for his next move, but he had nothing left. The air was thick with tension, and for the first time, the passengers weren't whispering about Aisha. They were whispering about him. A woman with a sleek ponytail and a designer shawl, the kind who always knew the right people, leaned toward her seatmate, a man in a crisp black shirt. "She's probably just a figurehead," she said, her voice sharp with confidence. "Titles like that don't mean much." "Probably got it through connections," the man nodded, his cufflinks glinting as he sipped his whiskey. "Yeah, some bureaucratic nobody. Bet she's just here for the photo op." Aisha's daughter dropped her rabbit, and as Aisha bent to pick it up, her eyes caught the woman's, steady and unyielding, before she turned away. A man in a navy suit, his briefcase monogrammed with his initials, leaned toward his companion, a woman with a silk clutch. "She's probably faking it," he said, his voice thick with disdain. "No one that important dresses like that." "It's all an act," the woman nodded, her clutch glinting in the dim light. "Exactly. She's trying too hard to look humble." "Real power doesn't hide." Aisha's daughter giggled softly, and Aisha handed her a small toy plane from her bag, her movements calm, her silence a wall against their words. The pilot's voice came over the intercom again, this time with an edge. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've just received news. Nakamura Global Ventures is under international investigation." The words hit like a shockwave. Passengers turned to Hiroshi, their eyes wide. "What's going on?" the venture capitalist asked, his voice sharp. Hiroshi's face drained of color, his hands shaking as he reached for his phone. Aisha reached into her bag, pulling out a small folder. She opened it, revealing credentials that gleamed under the cabin lights: Global Aviation Security Consultant, Lead Investigator, International Financial Oversight. A woman in a tailored coat, her posture screaming corporate dominance, leaned toward the man next to her, a guy with a silk tie and a perpetual smirk. "She's probably exaggerating her role," she said, her voice low but cutting. "No way someone like her is calling the shots," the man nodded, adjusting his tie. "Bet she's just a front. Someone else is pulling the strings." Aisha's daughter giggled, playing with her rabbit, and Aisha smiled at her, her hand steady as she tucked a braid behind her ear, ignoring the whispers. Hiroshi stared, his mouth moving but no sound coming out. You're the one in charge," he finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. Aisha gave a slight nod, her eyes never leaving his. Yes, she said. And you just showed me exactly who you are. The cabin was silent, the kind of silence that holds its breath. Yuki's tablet buzzed, and she glanced at it, her face paling. The venture capitalist looked away, his hands fidgeting. The woman with the emerald earrings clutched her bag, her knuckles white. A man with a leather briefcase, his air of superiority as polished as his shoes, leaned toward his companion, a woman with a silver bangle that clinked softly. She's probably bitter, he said, his voice smug. That's why she's so quiet. Nobody wants a woman like that, the woman nodded, her bangle catching the light. Exactly. Power doesn't mean she's happy. Look at her, no life. Aisha's hand rested on her daughter's shoulder, her gold band glinting faintly, her silence louder than their words. Hiroshi wasn't done. Not quite. He leaned forward, his voice rising, desperate. No one truly respects you, he shouted, the words echoing in the cabin. It's only your power they want, Yuki whispered, her voice barely audible. A cold woman like her will never know love, the woman with the tote murmured, she might save the world, but who would love her? Hiroshi sneered, his last shot. You'll die alone. The cabin felt heavy, like the words were trying to drag Aisha down with them. A woman with a sleek laptop bag, her air of corporate entitlement unmistakable, whispered to her companion, a man with a monogrammed handkerchief. She'll crash and burn, she said, her voice sharp with certainty. Power like that doesn't last for someone like her, the man nodded, dabbing his brow. She's a flash in the pan. Wait till the real players step in. Aisha's daughter yawned, nestling closer, and Aisha adjusted her blanket, her movements deliberate, her silence a shield against their words. She didn't flinch. She just looked at Hiroshi, her eyes steady, her face calm. Her daughter reached for her hand, and Aisha squeezed it gently, her thumb brushing over her small fingers. The silence stretched, heavy and unbroken, until the cockpit door opened. The pilot stepped out, removing his cap. His face was familiar, not just from the uniform but from somewhere deeper, older. He walked straight to Aisha, his step sure, and took her hand. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice quiet but commanding, I am not just your pilot. I am the man who has waited 10 years for her. The cabin erupted in gasps, murmurs, shock. The pilot looked at Aisha, his eyes soft. Thank you for coming back, he said. Our daughter will be proud. Aisha's daughter looked up, her stuffed rabbit clutched tight, and smiled. Hiroshi collapsed into his seat, his face ashen, his empire crumbling under the weight of his own words. Yuki stared at her tablet, where a news alert flashed. Nakamura Global Ventures CEO under investigation. The venture capitalist's phone buzzed too, a message from his firm dropping him as a client. The woman with the emerald earrings turned away, her sponsorship deal gone, her name trending for all the wrong reasons. Aisha stood, lifting her daughter into her arms. The cabin watched as she walked toward the front, her step steady, her old carry-on left behind. The passengers broke into applause, soft at first, then louder, filling the air. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything, her strength, her grace, her truth. The plane descended, the lights of the city below coming into view, and Aisha held her daughter close, her husband's hand on her shoulder. For everyone who's ever been judged, looked down on, or felt the sting of words meant to break you, this is for you. You weren't wrong. You weren't alone. You carried your truth, just like she did, and you kept going. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.